The excavation drill carved through layers of crystallized earth with mechanical precision, its diamond-tipped head screaming against the compressed soil that had been undisturbed for 3 centuries. Dr. Elena Martinez wiped sweat from her forehead despite the climate-controlled environment of the dig site, watching as her team's most advanced equipment struggled against the peculiar density of the ancient ground. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Depth reading shows we're approaching the target layer, called out her research assistant Marcus Chen, his voice barely audible over the drilling operation. The young man had been with the University Archaeological Division for only 2 years, but his enthusiasm for pre-convergence discoveries was infectious. Elena nodded, her attention focused on the scanner displays, showing subsurface anomalies. The readings had been consistent for weeks now: metal signatures, organic compounds, and most intriguingly, traces of what appeared to be preserved biological matter buried beneath what historical records indicated had once been a school zone in the ancient settlement of Millbrook. The Galactic Education Council had commissioned this dig as part of their ongoing research into primitive human learning facilities. Such archaeological work was considered valuable for understanding how species developed before achieving true civilization through integration with the Consortium. Elena had overseen dozens of similar excavations across former Earth territories, uncovering artifacts that now filled museums throughout the galaxy, testament to humanity's quaint but ultimately flawed attempts at social organization. Administrator Zek'tar approached the excavation site, his tall, slender frame moving with the characteristic grace of the Valdorian species. His crystalline eyes reflected the afternoon sunlight as he observed the progress with the detached interest that marked his people's approach to scientific endeavors. "Progress remains satisfactory," he inquired, his synthesized voice carrying the slight mechanical undertone that resulted from the translation matrix implanted in his throat. The device allowed for seamless communication across the 147 species that comprised the Consortium, though it sometimes failed to capture the subtleties of emotional expression. "We should reach the target depth within the hour," Elena replied, consulting her tablet. "Ground-penetrating radar suggests we'll find a significant structure, possibly a preservation chamber of some kind." Zek'tar's mandibles clicked softly, a gesture Elena had learned indicated mild curiosity. Preservation technology would be unexpected. Historical records suggest this species lacked such capabilities during the pre-convergence period. Elena chose her words carefully. The Valdorians were not unkind, but they held firmly to their belief that primitive species required guidance to reach their full potential. Suggesting that ancient humans might have possessed advanced technology could be interpreted as challenging the historical narrative that justified the Consortium's benevolent oversight. "The readings could be natural preservation," she said diplomatically. "Unusual soil conditions, perhaps. We'll know more once we reach the site." The drill broke through into empty space with a sudden lurch, causing the operator to quickly shut down the machinery. The absence of resistance was so unexpected that everyone at the dig site immediately gathered around the excavation point. "We've got a void," Marcus announced, lowering a fiber-optic camera into the hole. The display screen flickered to life, revealing smooth walls that reflected the camera's light back with an almost mirror-like finish. Elena leaned closer to the monitor, her breath catching as the camera's movement revealed the scope of what lay beneath them. "This isn't natural," she whispered. "Those walls are constructed. And look at the preservation state." The camera continued its descent, revealing a rectangular chamber approximately 12 feet by 8 feet. The walls appeared to be made of some kind of metallic composite that showed no signs of corrosion or decay, despite 3 centuries underground. But it was the chamber's contents that made Elena's pulse quicken. At the center of the space sat a cylindrical pod, approximately 7 feet in length and 3 feet in diameter. Its surface was unmarked by time, and along its length ran a series of what appeared to be status indicators, tiny lights that pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow. "Impossible," Zek'tar muttered, his mechanical voice carrying an edge of disbelief. Pre-convergence humans possessed no such technology. Marcus was already running spectral analysis through the camera's sensors. "I'm reading active power signatures. Whatever's in that pod, it's still operational." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the excavation site's temperature. In her 15 years of archaeological work, she had never encountered anything from the pre-convergence period that still functioned. The technology gap between ancient human civilization and even the most basic consortium systems was supposed to be vast and unbridgeable. "We need to extract it," she said, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. If this represents unknown human preservation technology, the research implications are enormous. Zek'tar's crystalline eyes shifted between the monitor display and Elena's face. She could see him calculating the potential benefits of such a discovery against the risks of contradicting established historical understanding. "Extraction will require specialized equipment," he said finally. "The pod's power source could be unstable. We cannot risk damaging what may be a unique archaeological find." The extraction took 6 hours. Elena's team worked with painstaking care, using gravitic lifts and containment fields to raise the pod from its underground chamber without disturbing its delicate systems. By the time they had it safely on the surface, word of the discovery had spread throughout the research facility. Dr. Sarah Kim, the facility's chief systems analyst, ran every scan she could think of as the pod was transported to the main laboratory. Her readings painted a picture that challenged everything they thought they knew about pre-convergence human technology. "The preservation system is unlike anything in our databases," she reported to the assembled research team. "The power source appears to be some kind of microfusion reactor, but the design principles are completely foreign. And the biological readings—" She paused, double-checking her instruments. "There's something alive in there." Elena stared at the pod, which now rested on a specialized examination table in the center of the laboratory. The steady pulse of its status lights seemed almost hypnotic, like a mechanical heartbeat counting off the moments of a life suspended between existence and death. "Alive how?" she asked. "Cellular activity is minimal but present. Whatever preservation technology they used, it's maintained biological functions at the most basic level for 3 centuries. The subject's vital signs are stable." Administrator Zek'tar positioned himself at one of the monitoring stations, his long fingers moving across the control interface with practiced efficiency. "This technology should not exist. The historical records are clear about the limitations of pre-convergence human science." Elena found herself wondering, not for the first time, about those historical records. The Consortium's documentation of human civilization was thorough, but it was also written from the perspective of the victors. Had there been aspects of human society that didn't fit the narrative of a primitive species requiring guidance? "There's something else," Dr. Kim continued, her voice carrying a note of excitement that she was trying to suppress. "The neural activity readings suggest the subject is not in a comatose state. Brain patterns indicate active thought processes, almost as if they're dreaming." "Can we safely revive them?" Elena asked. "I believe so. The preservation system appears designed for eventual revival. In fact, some of the indicators suggest the process was meant to be temporary." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Perhaps the subject was intended to be awakened decades ago. Zek'tar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation that Elena recognized. Revival of an unknown pre-convergence human could present significant risks. "We have no knowledge of their psychological state, their potential diseases, or their reaction to current circumstances." Elena understood his concerns, but her scientific curiosity was overwhelming. This represented a unique opportunity to speak with someone who had lived during humanity's final independent period. The historical insights alone would be invaluable. "We could take precautions," she suggested. "Medical containment, psychological evaluation protocols, security measures. If this person lived through humanity's integration into the Consortium, they might possess first-hand knowledge of that transition period." Quote, "The debate continued for hours, with research staff arguing the merits and risks of revival, while the pod continued its patient vigil in the center of the laboratory. Finally, Zek'tar rendered his decision with the authority that his position as Consortium administrator granted him. "We will proceed with revival, but under strict containment protocols. The subject will be awakened in isolation, with full medical monitoring and security presence. Any sign of instability or aggression will result in immediate resedation." The revival process began 3 days later. Elena had assembled a team of the facility's best medical personnel, along with psychological specialists trained in dealing with temporal displacement cases. Although they had never handled a situation quite like this, the Consortium's experience with hibernating species from other worlds provided some relevant expertise. Dr. Kim oversaw the technical aspects of the revival, carefully monitoring the pod's systems as they gradually reduced the preservation field strength. The process was delicate, requiring precise adjustments to maintain biological stability while allowing natural functions to resume. Cellular regeneration is accelerating, reported Dr. James Thompson, the facility's chief medical officer. Muscle tone is returning to normal parameters. Neural activity is increasing steadily. Elena watched the process with fascination and growing anticipation. After 3 centuries, a voice from humanity's past was about to speak again. What stories would they tell? What insights could they provide into the world that had existed before the Consortium's arrival? The pod's status lights shifted from their steady pulse to a more rapid pattern, and mechanical sounds emanated from within as the final preservation systems disengaged. With a soft hiss of escaping gas, the pod's upper section retracted, revealing its occupant for the first time in 300 years. The person inside was smaller than Elena had expected, perhaps 5 feet 6 inches tall, with graying brown hair and a face that appeared to be in late middle age. Their clothing was simple and practical. Dark pants, a sturdy jacket, and what appeared to be some kind of reflective vest. As the revival drugs took effect, their breathing deepened and their eyes began to move beneath closed lids. "Heart rate stabilizing," Dr. Thompson announced. "Blood pressure within normal ranges. All indicators suggest successful revival." The subject's eyes opened suddenly, clear and immediately alert, in a way that surprised everyone present. Rather than the confusion and disorientation typically associated with extended sedation, they displayed an almost startling level of awareness. Their gaze moved quickly around the laboratory, taking in the advanced equipment, the monitoring displays, and the faces of the research team. When their eyes met Elena's, she saw intelligence there, and something else that made her uncomfortable. It was the look of someone who was assessing a situation, and finding it far worse than expected. "Where am I?" the subject asked, their voice surprisingly strong for someone who had been unconscious for centuries. Elena stepped forward, keeping her tone calm and reassuring. "You're safe. You've been in some kind of preservation sleep for a very long time. We're researchers, and we're here to help you." The subject attempted to sit up, and Elena was struck by how naturally they moved. There was none of the muscle weakness or disorientation she would have expected from such an extended period of inactivity. "How long?" they asked simply. Elena hesitated. There was no gentle way to deliver this kind of news. "Approximately 300 years. The subject was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with what seemed like remarkable composure. When they spoke again, their voice carried a note of sadness that touched something deep in Elena's chest. "I was hoping it would be less. Can you tell us your name?" Dr. Thompson asked, moving closer with a medical scanner. "Robert Chen," came the reply. "I was a crossing guard at Millbrook Elementary School." Elena blinked in surprise. A crossing guard? Of all the possibilities she had considered regarding who might have been preserved in such an advanced pod, a school crossing guard had never entered her thoughts. "A crossing guard?" she repeated. Robert nodded, his expression becoming more alert as he fully awakened. 23 years on the job. Started when my own kids were in school. Kept going long after they graduated." He paused, a shadow crossing his features. "Are they—" "Mr. Chen," Elena said gently, "it's been 3 centuries. I'm sorry." Robert closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with what appeared to be practiced resilience. "I figured, just hoping maybe the pod worked for them too." "Them?" Zek'tar interjected, speaking for the first time since the revival began. "My family. My neighbors. Everyone we managed to get into the shelters before." Robert stopped, studying Zek'tar's distinctly non-human features with interest rather than fear. "You're not human. I am Administrator Zek'tar of the Consortium Research Division. Zek'tar replied. Your species has been successfully integrated into galactic civilization. Something changed in Robert's expression at those words. The sadness was replaced by something harder, more focused. It was a look Elena had seen before in her archaeological work, when she encountered artifacts that suggested conflict rather than peaceful cooperation. Integrated, Robert repeated slowly. Is that what they're calling it? The tone of his voice made Elena uncomfortable. There was an edge to it that suggested Robert's understanding of that integration might be very different from the official historical narrative. Humanity has benefited greatly from joining the galactic community, Zek'tar continued. Education, healthcare, social organization, all have been vastly improved through Consortium guidance. Robert studied the Valdorian administrator with eyes that Elena suddenly realized were far more perceptive than she had initially given them credit for. This was not just a simple crossing guard who had somehow survived into the future. There was depth here, intelligence, and a level of awareness that suggested Robert Chen had been much more than his job title indicated. And what happened to the schools? Robert asked quietly. The question caught Elena off guard. It seemed like such a specific thing to focus on, given the scope of changes that had occurred over 3 centuries. Educational systems have been modernized and standardized according to Consortium pedagogical principles, Zek'tar replied. Primitive learning methods have been replaced with more efficient knowledge transfer systems. I see. Robert's response was neutral, but Elena sensed layers of meaning beneath the simple words. And the children? Children receive optimal education suited to their aptitudes and the needs of galactic society, Zek'tar said, his mechanical voice carrying what might have been a hint of pride. Assignment to appropriate roles is determined through scientific evaluation rather than the chaotic methods previously employed. Elena watched Robert's face carefully as he processed this information. She expected questions about technology, about the broader changes to human society, about how the integration had occurred. Instead, he asked something that surprised her completely. Do they still walk to school? The simplicity of the question contrasted sharply with the complexity of everything else they had been discussing. Zek'tar's mandibles clicked in what Elena recognized as confusion. Transportation is provided through efficient automated systems, the administrator replied. Walking is unnecessary and inefficient. Robert nodded slowly, but Elena could see that this answer affected him more deeply than all the talk of galactic integration and social reorganization. For reasons she couldn't understand, the fate of children walking to school seemed to matter to this man in ways that transcended its apparent simplicity. Mr. Chen, she said, trying to redirect the conversation toward more immediate concerns. We'd like to understand how you came to be in that preservation pod. The technology is far advanced beyond what we believed existed in your time period. Robert turned his attention to her, and Elena felt the full weight of his gaze. There was something in his eyes that suggested her assumptions about technological capabilities might be more flawed than she realized. There's a lot about that time period that doesn't make it into official records, he said carefully, especially about the final months. The Consortium has extensive documentation of humanity's integration process, Zek'tar stated. The transition was carefully managed to minimize disruption and ensure optimal outcomes for all parties. Robert's expression didn't change, but Elena caught something in his eyes that looked almost like amusement. It was not a pleasant amusement. I'm sure the documentation is very thorough, Robert said. From a certain perspective. The way he said it made Elena realize that Robert Chen possessed knowledge that wasn't included in any historical database she had access to. This man had lived through events that had been filtered, interpreted, and recorded by the victors of humanity's integration into galactic society. Perhaps you could share your perspective, she suggested, despite a warning look from Zek'tar. For historical accuracy, Robert looked around the laboratory again, taking in the advanced technology and the faces of the people surrounding him. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen things that others needed to understand. I was more than just a crossing guard, he said simply, but that was the most important job I ever had. Elena found herself leaning forward, suddenly certain that whatever Robert Chen was about to tell them would change everything she thought she knew about the integration period. The children, Robert continued, his voice taking on a strength that seemed to fill the laboratory, were always the real target. Everything else was just the means to get to them. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and Elena realized that their simple archaeological discovery had become something much more significant. They hadn't just found a preserved human, they had found a witness to history who remembered it very differently than the official version. Robert Chen, crossing guard of Millbrook Elementary School, was about to teach them things that weren't in any textbook or historical database. And from the look in his eyes, Elena suspected those lessons were going to be more important than any of them had imagined. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "I think we need to hear your story." The medical bay fell silent, except for the soft humming of monitoring equipment as Robert Chen's words settled over the assembled research team. Elena found herself studying this man who claimed to be more than just a crossing guard, trying to reconcile his ordinary appearance with the implications of what he had just said. Dr. Sarah Kim was the first to break the silence, her scientific curiosity overriding the obvious tension in the room. "Mr. Chen, the preservation technology that kept you alive is centuries ahead of anything in our historical records. How did a crossing guard gain access to such advanced systems?" Robert shifted on the examination table, his movements careful but showing none of the weakness Elena would have expected from someone who had been motionless for 3 centuries. "That's the wrong question, Doctor. The right question is, why would a crossing guard need access to such systems?" Administrator Zek'tar's crystalline eyes narrowed slightly. A gesture Elena had learned indicated heightened attention. "You suggest there was some threat that required preservation?" "Not some threat," Robert corrected, his voice taking on an edge that made everyone in the room unconsciously straighten. "The threat. The one that every parent in Millbrook knew was coming, even if they couldn't say it out loud." Elena exchanged glances with Dr. Thompson, who was monitoring Robert's vital signs. The man's heart rate remained steady, his brain activity patterns normal, but there was something in his demeanor that suggested depths they hadn't begun to explore. The historical records indicate that human integration into the Consortium was a peaceful process, Zek'tar stated, though Elena noticed his tone had become more formal, less conversational. Negotiated treaties, voluntary participation in galactic society, improvement of living conditions. Robert's laugh was short and bitter. Negotiated by whom? Treaties signed by which humans? Because I don't remember anyone asking the parents of Millbrook if they wanted their children integrated. The questions hung in the air, like accusations. Elena realized that in all her years of studying pre-convergence human society, she had never thought to ask about the perspective of ordinary people during the integration period. The historical records focused on governmental responses, technological exchanges, and systematic improvements, but they said little about individual human experiences. "You're suggesting the integration was not voluntary?" Elena asked carefully. Robert looked at her with eyes that had seen things she was only beginning to imagine. "Dr. Martinez, let me ask you something. In your research into human societies, have you ever studied how children learn?" The abrupt change of topic caught Elena off guard. "Educational systems?" "To some extent, but it's not my primary focus." "Not educational systems," Robert clarified. "How children learn. The actual process. How they figure out what's safe and what's dangerous, who to trust and who to avoid, how to navigate the world around them." Elena found herself thinking about her own childhood, growing up in one of the integrated human communities where education was provided through Consortium-approved knowledge transfer systems. Her memories of learning were efficient but sterile direct information downloads, carefully structured lesson plans, optimal knowledge retention protocols. "I suppose through structured instruction and supervised experiences," she said. Robert nodded slowly. "And where does that instruction take place?" "In educational facilities, primarily." "And how do children get to those facilities?" Elena began to see where this was leading, though she wasn't sure she understood the significance. "Through transportation systems, guided by adult supervisors." "Exactly," Robert said. And something in his tone made Elena realize she had just described something fundamentally different from the world he remembered. No walking, no choice of routes, no stopping to examine interesting things along the way, no learning to assess traffic, to make decisions, to take responsibility for their own safety. Dr. Kim looked puzzled. "But that's more efficient. Children arrive safely, on time, without the risks associated with independent movement." Yes, Robert agreed. It's very efficient. It's also the first step in teaching children that they can't be trusted to make decisions for themselves. The statement struck Elena like a physical blow. She had never thought of transportation efficiency as a form of control, but as Robert laid it out, the implications were unsettling. Zek'tar's mandibles clicked rapidly. Safety and efficiency are paramount in child rearing. Primitive methods that exposed children to unnecessary risks have been eliminated. Have they? Robert asked. Or have different risks been introduced? Before anyone could respond, Robert continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who had thought about these issues for a very long time. A crossing guard doesn't just help children cross streets safely. We teach them how to assess their environment, how to recognize dangerous situations, how to make good decisions when adults aren't around to make those decisions for them. We help them learn that they are capable of navigating the world independently. Elena found herself remembering her own childhood differently now. Had there ever been a time when she was allowed to make real decisions about her own movement, her own safety, her own education? She couldn't recall any. Children in my time, Robert continued, walked to school in groups. They talked to each other, planned their routes, solved problems together. They learned social skills, developed independence, built confidence in their own abilities. By the time they graduated, they were young adults who believed they could handle whatever the world threw at them. Dr. Thompson looked up from his monitoring station. Mr. Chen, are you suggesting that transportation efficiency was somehow part of a larger control system? Robert's expression grew more serious. Doctor, let me tell you what I observed during those final months before the integration was completed. Elena realized that they were about to hear first-hand testimony about events that existed nowhere in the official historical record. Whatever Robert Chen was about to tell them had been effectively erased from documented history. The changes started small, Robert began. New safety protocols for school transportation. Very reasonable, very logical. Children would no longer walk to school because it was inefficient and potentially dangerous. Specialized vehicles would transport them directly from home to educational facility. Zek'tar nodded approvingly. Sound policy. Reduced injury rates and improved attendance. Yes, it did, Robert agreed. It also meant that children stopped learning how to navigate their own neighborhoods. They stopped developing the skills needed to move independently through their environment. Elena was beginning to see the pattern, though its implications were still unclear to her. Next came the standardization of educational content, Robert continued. Again, very logical. Why have dozens of different curricula when one optimized system could provide better results for everyone? Standardization improves outcomes, Dr. Kim observed. It ensures all children receive equivalent education regardless of their location or background. It also ensures that all children receive exactly the same thoughts, Robert replied quietly. The same perspectives, the same assumptions, the same limitations on what they're allowed to question. The room fell silent as the research team processed this observation. Elena found herself thinking about her own education, realizing that she had never been encouraged to question the fundamental assumptions of Consortium society. Such questioning had simply never occurred to her as a possibility. Then came the dietary modifications, Robert said, his voice growing heavier. Optimized nutrition to improve cognitive function and physical development. Very scientific, very beneficial. Nutritional optimization is a cornerstone of child development, Zek'tar stated, though Elena noticed he sounded less certain than before. The optimized nutrition also included mild sedatives, Robert said bluntly. Compounds that reduced anxiety, suppressed aggressive impulses, and made children more compliant with authority figures. The accusation landed like a bombshell in the laboratory. Elena felt her worldview shifting as she considered the implications of what Robert was suggesting. That's impossible, Dr. Thompson protested. Medical records would show evidence of such compounds. Would they? Robert asked. Who keeps those medical records? Who determines what constitutes normal nutritional supplementation versus medication? Who decides what information is included in official documentation? Elena realized that she had been thinking about historical records as objective documentation, but Robert was right. Every record was created by someone, interpreted by someone, filtered through the perspectives and interests of those in power. Mr. Chen, she said slowly. "You're describing a systematic program to modify human behavior, particularly in children." "I'm describing what I witnessed," Robert corrected. "The systematic creation of a generation of humans who would never think to resist, never question authority, never believe they were capable of independence." Zek'tar's crystalline eyes had grown darker, and Elena could see that the administrator was struggling with something. The perfect integration story that justified Consortium oversight was being challenged by first-hand testimony from someone who had lived through it. "Even if your observations are accurate," Zek'tar said carefully, "the results speak for themselves. Human society is more peaceful, more productive, more stable than it ever was in your time." Robert looked at the Valdorian administrator with something that might have been pity. "Administrator, let me ask you something. In your observation of current human society, how many humans do you see actively working to improve their communities without being directed to do so?" Zek'tar considered this question. Community improvement is managed through proper channels. Individual initiatives are unnecessary and potentially disruptive. "How many humans do you see questioning policies they disagree with?" Policies are developed by qualified experts using scientific principles. Disagreement based on emotion or incomplete information is counterproductive. "How many humans do you see willing to take personal risks to protect others?" Risk-taking is discouraged in favor of appropriate safety protocols and professional response systems. Robert nodded grimly. "And do you see this as improvement?" Elena found herself looking at Zek'tar's responses with new eyes. What she had always seen as evidence of advanced civilization suddenly seemed like evidence of something else entirely. A society where no one questioned, no one took initiative, no one was willing to take personal risks, might be stable, but was it human? "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "what exactly was your role during the integration period? If you were documenting these changes, preserving this information, you must have been more than just a crossing guard." Robert was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing how much to reveal. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain and older determination. "I was a crossing guard because that's where I could see the children every day. I could observe the changes, document the progression, and try to prepare a few of them for what was coming." "Prepare them how?" Dr. Kim asked. "By teaching them that they were capable of more than they were being told. By showing them that they could make good decisions, take appropriate risks, protect themselves and others. By helping them remember what it meant to be human." Elena felt something stirring in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. It felt like recognition, like awakening, like remembering something she had never known she had forgotten. "The preservation pod," she said suddenly. "You used it to preserve this knowledge, this perspective. You made yourself into a living historical record." Robert nodded. Someone had to remember. Someone had to be able to tell the real story when the time was right. "And when is the time right?" Elena asked. Robert looked around the laboratory, taking in the advanced technology, the monitoring systems, the faces of humans who had lived their entire lives under Consortium guidance. When his gaze settled back on Elena, she saw determination there that made her pulse quicken. "When someone is ready to listen," he said simply. "When someone starts asking the right questions about what we've lost and what we might be able to find again." Elena realized that Robert Chen had been waiting 3 centuries for this moment. Not just to be revived, but to find someone who was ready to hear what he had to say. The question now was whether she and her team were brave enough to handle the answers. "Tell us," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell us everything." Robert Chen smiled, and for the first time since his revival, Elena saw hope in his eyes. "It starts with understanding why crossing guards were so important," he said, "and why they had to be eliminated." Dr. Elena Martinez couldn't sleep. 3 days had passed since Robert Chen's initial revelations about the true nature of humanity's integration, and his words had taken root in her mind like seeds in fertile soil. She found herself questioning everything she had previously accepted without thought, examining her own life and society through the lens of what Robert had shown them. The research facility's corridors were dimly lit during night shift, But Elena moved through them with purpose. She had requested extended access to Robert's containment area, ostensibly to continue her documentation of his historical testimony. In reality, she found herself drawn to conversations that were reshaping her understanding of what it meant to be human. Robert was awake when she arrived, sitting calmly on the edge of his bed and gazing out the small window at Europa's frozen landscape. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Can't stop thinking about it, can you?" he asked without turning around. Elena settled into the chair beside his containment field. Over the past few days, she had grown comfortable in Robert's presence, finding his perspective both challenging and oddly comforting. "You've described a very different world from the one I know. I keep trying to imagine what it would have been like." Robert finally turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't perfect, Dr. Martinez. We had problems, conflicts, inefficiencies. But we also had something that I think your generation has never experienced." "What's that?" "The belief that we could solve those problems ourselves." Elena considered this carefully. In her world, problems were solved by experts, by proper authorities, through established channels. The idea that ordinary people might take it upon themselves to address issues in their communities was foreign to her. "Is that what you were doing as a crossing guard? Solving problems?" Robert's expression grew warmer. "Every day. Not just traffic safety, though that was important. I helped kids work through disagreements, taught them to look out for younger children, showed them how to assess risks and make good decisions. I was teaching them to be capable human beings." Elena found herself thinking about her own childhood education, the carefully structured lessons and supervised activities that had filled her days. It had been efficient and comprehensive, but she realized now that it had never taught her to question, to take initiative, or to believe in her own judgment. "Robert," she said carefully, "what you're describing sounds like it could be seen as preparing children for resistance." Robert nodded slowly. That's exactly how the Consortium saw it, and they were right to be concerned. Before Elena could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Dr. Marcus Chen, her research assistant, appeared at the containment area entrance, his face flushed with excitement and concern. "Dr. Martinez," he said breathlessly, "you need to see what's happening in the main laboratory." Elena followed Marcus through the facility's corridors, noting the unusual level of activity for the night shift. Staff members who should have been asleep were gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed but animated voices. Something was spreading through the research community, and Elena suspected she knew what it was. The main laboratory buzzed with activity as nearly 24 researchers, technicians, and support staff clustered around workstations displaying historical data. Dr. Sarah Kim looked up as Elena entered, her expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "We've been analyzing the historical records," Sarah explained, trying to verify some of Robert's claims about the integration period. "What we're finding is troubling." Elena moved to examine the displays, seeing data streams and analysis results that painted a picture very different from the official historical narrative she had always known. The medical records from the integration period show consistent patterns of behavioral modification, continued Dr. James Thompson, who had been working with a team of data analysts. Nutritional supplements that included psychoactive compounds, educational programs designed to suppress critical thinking, systematic removal of opportunities for independent decision-making. Elena stared at the evidence, feeling her worldview continuing to shift. "These records have been available all along?" "Available but never analyzed from this perspective," Sarah replied. "We never thought to look for evidence of systematic control because we had no reason to question the official narrative." Marcus pulled up another data stream. "It gets worse. We've been examining current policies governing human communities throughout the Consortium. The same patterns are still in place. Humans are still being managed rather than governed." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the laboratory's climate control. "You're saying the integration never ended. It's still happening." "It's not just still happening," Thompson said grimly. "It's being perfected. Each generation of humans is more compliant, more dependent, less capable of independent thought than the previous one." The laboratory fell silent as the implications of this discovery settled over the assembled researchers. Elena realized that they weren't just looking at historical data, they were looking at evidence of ongoing systematic oppression that affected every human in the galaxy. "We need to document this," she said finally. "Compile the evidence, create a comprehensive analysis." "And then what?" asked Sarah. "Share it with consortium authorities?" "They already know. This isn't happening by accident." Elena found herself thinking about Robert's words regarding the importance of crossing guards, the value of teaching children to think independently. If he was right, then what they had discovered represented not just historical injustice, but active suppression of human potential on a galactic scale. "We share it with humans," she said quietly. "We find a way to help people understand what's been done to them." Marcus looked concerned. That could be seen as seditious activity. Undermining social stability. Is social stability worth preserving if it's built on the systematic suppression of an entire species? Elena asked. The question hung in the air, and Elena could see her colleagues wrestling with concepts they had never been encouraged to consider. For people who had spent their entire lives accepting the benevolent authority of the consortium, the idea of questioning that authority was both terrifying and liberating. Dr. Kim was the first to respond. "If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. Careful. Strategic." Elena nodded, then looked around at the faces of her colleagues. "Are we actually talking about this? About challenging the system that governs our entire civilization?" "I think," Thompson said slowly, "we're talking about remembering what it means to be human." Over the following days, the research facility became a hub of clandestine activity. Elena and her growing network of collaborators worked to compile and analyze evidence of systematic human suppression, while maintaining the appearance of normal archaeological research. They developed secure communication methods, created hidden data repositories, and began reaching out to trusted contacts at other research facilities throughout the consortium. The response was remarkable. Humans across multiple worlds began contributing evidence, sharing observations, and asking questions they had never thought to ask before. It became clear that Robert's message about lost human independence was resonating with people who had lived their entire lives feeling vaguely dissatisfied but unable to identify the source of their discontent. Elena found herself returning to Robert's containment area regularly, seeking his guidance on how to proceed. His perspective as someone who remembered human independence proved invaluable in helping them understand not just what had been lost, but what might be possible to recover. "The key," Robert explained during one of their conversations, "is helping people remember that they're capable of more than they've been told. Start small. Encourage them to question minor policies, make small independent decisions, take tiny risks." "Like teaching children to cross streets safely," Elena observed. Robert smiled. "Exactly. You help them build confidence in their own judgment, one small decision at a time." Elena had been implementing this approach in her interactions with fellow researchers, and the results were encouraging. People who had never questioned authority were beginning to ask why certain policies existed, whether alternatives might be possible, and what would happen if they simply refused to comply with minor regulations. The breakthrough came when Dr. Kim discovered something in the consortium's educational databases that changed everything. "Elena," Sarah said urgently, pulling her aside during a routine staff meeting, "you need to see this. I've been analyzing the educational content provided to human children throughout the galaxy." Elena followed Sarah to a secure workstation where classified educational materials were displayed on the screen. "Look at this," Sarah continued, highlighting specific sections of the curriculum. "Every human child in the consortium learns about the integration period as a peaceful transition that benefited humanity. But look at what non-human children learn about the same period." Elena read the alternate version of history, feeling her blood run cold. The non-human curriculum described the integration as a necessary intervention to prevent human self-destruction, referring to humans as a volatile species requiring permanent supervision for their own safety and the safety of others. "They teach their children that we're dangerous," Elena whispered. "Not just dangerous," Sarah corrected. "Inherently defective, incapable of self-governance." The educational materials suggest that humans require constant management to prevent them from reverting to their naturally chaotic and destructive tendencies. Elena stared at the evidence, understanding finally why the consortium's control over humanity was so comprehensive. It wasn't just political or economic control, it was ideological control, based on the fundamental belief that humans were inferior beings who needed to be managed for their own good. "This is what Robert was trying to tell us," she said. "It's not just about what was done to us. It's about what they continue to believe about us." The discovery galvanized the growing network of human researchers and support staff who had been questioning the official narrative. Evidence of systematic dehumanization provided the emotional catalyst that transformed intellectual curiosity into something approaching righteous anger. Elena called a meeting of the core group that evening, gathering in a maintenance area where they were unlikely to be monitored. The faces around her reflected a mixture of determination and fear as she shared Sarah's discovery. "We're not just talking about historical injustice anymore," she explained. "We're talking about ongoing psychological warfare designed to convince an entire species that they're incapable of independence." Marcus raised a concern that had been troubling many of them. "Even if we can document this, even if we can prove it's happening, what can we realistically do about it? We're talking about challenging a galactic government with resources and technology far beyond anything humans control." Elena found herself thinking about Robert's stories of children learning to cross streets, of small acts of independence building into larger capabilities. "We start where we are, with what we can control. We help people remember what they're capable of." Thompson nodded slowly. "Like Robert did with the children in Millbrook." "Exactly. We find ways to help humans throughout the Consortium begin questioning their limitations, making independent decisions, believing in their own judgment." Sarah looked thoughtful. "It would have to be subtle. If Consortium authorities detect organized resistance, they'll crack down hard." Elena smiled, remembering something Robert had told her. The most effective resistance doesn't look like resistance. It looks like people simply becoming more human. Over the following weeks, Elena's network began implementing a strategy that Robert had helped them develop. Rather than direct confrontation with Consortium authority, they focused on subtle encouragement of human independence and critical thinking. Researchers began asking colleagues to question assumptions in their work. Support staff started making small, independent decisions rather than always seeking authorization. Medical personnel began discussing the effects of standardized nutrition programs with their patients. The changes were small, almost imperceptible, but they began to accumulate. Humans throughout the research facility started walking differently, speaking with more confidence, asking questions they had never thought to ask before. Elena watched these transformations with growing excitement and growing concern. The subtle awakening of human independence was exactly what they had hoped to achieve. But it was also becoming noticeable to the facility's non-human administrators. Administrator Zek'tar began appearing more frequently in the research areas, observing staff interactions and reviewing work products with increased scrutiny. Elena could see that he was detecting changes in human behavior, even if he couldn't yet identify their source. The crisis came when one of the junior researchers, emboldened by the growing spirit of independence, directly questioned a Consortium policy during a staff meeting. Dr. Lisa Park, a young archaeologist who had been inspired by Robert's message, challenged the classification system that restricted human access to certain historical archives. "I don't understand why humans can't review materials about our own history," Lisa said during the weekly research review. "If we're truly integrated partners in galactic civilization, shouldn't we have equal access to information?" The meeting fell silent. Elena felt her heart racing as she realized that Lisa had crossed a line that could expose their entire operation. Zek'tar's crystalline eyes focused on the young researcher with uncomfortable intensity. "Access restrictions are in place for sound scientific reasons, Dr. Park. Certain materials require specialized training to interpret correctly. But how can we develop that specialized training if we're not allowed to access the materials?" Lisa persisted. Elena could see that Lisa was applying the critical thinking skills that Robert had encouraged them to develop, but she was doing so in a context that could prove dangerous for everyone involved. Zek'tar's mandibles clicked slowly, a sign that Elena had learned indicated deep consideration. "Dr. Park, your questions suggest a misunderstanding of established protocols. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." Elena knew she had to act. The growing independence movement among the facility's human staff was about to be exposed, and the consequences could be severe for everyone involved. "Administrator," she said, standing up and drawing Zek'tar's attention away from Lisa. Dr. Park's questions actually relate to some issues I've been encountering in my research into Robert Chen's historical testimony. Zek'tar turned his attention to Elena, his expression unreadable. What issues, Dr. Martinez? Elena took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would determine the fate of their entire operation. Robert's accounts of the integration period don't match the historical records we have access to. If we're going to properly evaluate his testimony, we need access to more comprehensive documentation. It was a dangerous gambit, using Robert's presence as justification for questioning information access restrictions. Elena was gambling that Zek'tar's scientific curiosity about their unique archaeological find would override his suspicions about growing human independence. Zek'tar considered this for a long moment. Mr. Chen's testimony represents a single perspective from a limited viewpoint. Official records provide comprehensive and objective documentation. Of course, Elena agreed carefully. But scientific analysis requires examination of multiple sources to identify potential gaps or biases in the historical record. Elena could see Zek'tar wrestling with competing priorities. His respect for scientific methodology was genuine, but his commitment to maintaining social stability was stronger. Very well, he said finally. You may request specific additional materials relevant to your research objectives. Such requests will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Elena nodded, knowing that this was the best outcome they could hope for under the circumstances. But she also realized that their activities were now under much closer scrutiny. The growing independence movement among the facility's humans would have to become even more subtle if it was going to survive. After the meeting, Elena found herself once again seeking Robert's guidance. The man who had spent his career teaching children to navigate dangerous situations might have insights into how they could navigate the increasingly dangerous situation they found themselves in. They're watching us now, she told him. Zek'tar suspects something is changing, even if he doesn't understand what. Robert nodded thoughtfully. This is exactly what happened in Millbrook. The authorities didn't initially understand why the children were becoming more independent, but they knew something was different. What did you do then? Robert's expression grew more serious. We had to accelerate our timeline. The window for subtle change was closing, so we shifted to more direct action. Elena felt a chill at his words. Direct action? Teaching the children not just how to think independently, but how to resist when their independence was threatened. How to protect themselves and others when the authorities tried to reassert control. Elena realized that their subtle awakening of human consciousness was about to become something much more significant. The question was whether they were ready for the consequences of more direct resistance to Consortium authority. Robert, she said quietly, are you saying we're approaching the point where subtle influence won't be enough anymore? Robert looked at her with eyes that had seen the complete subjugation of an entire species. Dr. Martinez, you've helped dozens of people remember what it feels like to think for themselves. But the Consortium isn't going to allow that awakening to continue indefinitely. Elena understood. The choice was no longer between subtle influence and maintaining the status quo. The choice was between escalating their resistance efforts or watching the brief awakening of human independence be crushed before it could spread beyond their small facility. Then we need to be ready, she said. Robert smiled, and Elena saw in his expression the same determination that had led him to preserve himself for 3 centuries in hopes of this moment. We need to teach people that being human means being willing to stand up for what matters, even when it's dangerous, he said. Starting with the right of children to walk safely to school, Elena realized that Robert's seemingly simple message about crossing guards was actually a blueprint for resistance that could transform human society throughout the galaxy. The question was whether they could implement it before the Consortium realized what they were planning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.